All right. Okay, trustees, the webcast is ready to go. So we will resume. So the next item on our agenda is 5.1, which is the purchasing policy review, phase 5, and rescission of the architect selection policy. And who is speaking to this, please?
This purchasing policy forward for approval. I want to start off by recognizing the staff that are here today and that have worked through this policy over the last number of years, actually, to update the policy and answer any questions today. We're very fortunate to have a significant amount of expertise of these staff at TDSB. We have Craig Snyder, who is a professional accountant. We have Anita Pathmanathan, who has over 10 years in procurement, including procurement manager at municipalities, and has a Council of Supply Chain Management professional designation. We have Vitaly Plotnikov, who has a master's in public administration, and we have Jennifer Seville, obviously a lawyer, our general counsel, as well as many of their staff who have all come together to provide this today. We're very proud of the changes that we've made to this policy, and we've incorporated the feedback that we received from trustees and from the public while ensuring that the policy complies with the very clear direction from regulations and broader public sector procurement directive. The policy has followed through a very thorough policy work plan. In addition, after this policy was originally brought to GPC in March 2023, staff used the feedback from that session to provide further improvements to the purchasing policy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig Snyder, who is going to start us off with a presentation.
Thank you, Stacy, and I'll just bring up the presentation on the screen, and hopefully someone can let me know if you see it there.
Not yet.
Not yet. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, and good evening, trustees. So on the presentation tonight, to walk you through, I'll do a brief overview of the purchasing process, TDSB's current purchasing approvals, and then walk you through the changes to the policy. And then, of course, as always, staff are available to answer any questions you may have. So the purchasing overview, we are a public sector body, and therefore we must follow the broader Public Sector Accountability Act, which outlines the prerequisites for how we are compensated expenses, as well as documentation and procurement. So we are following that process as we work to secure vendors to supply the goods and services that the board needs to fill its mandate. So the broader public sector directive ensures that the publicly funded services and goods, including construction, consultation, and information, are acquired through an open and fair and transparent process. There are 5 key principles outlined in this slide that talk to those processes that are transparent and fair for all vendors, being accountability, transparency, value for money of the organization, quality of service delivery, and process standardization. And we're hoping through this change in the purchasing that will reinforce these deliverables. As far as how we procure at the TDSB, there are 5 different ways we do it. There's requests for information, where we go out and ask vendors about a certain product to understand the surroundings of it. There's a request for expression of interest. This is where we try to set up vendors of record for future business, and this is primarily used in our construction area in facilities. There's requests for quotation, where we're going out and asking for a quote for a good or service to procure it. And then there's an RFP process. We're going for larger projects or larger purchases, where we go for a full tender process and then there's requests for tenders for construction. And we do pre-qualify vendors, as you're aware, to help us limit the field when we're doing those big tenders. So currently the TSB informally obtains quotes for up to $100,000. And for purchases over $100,000, we use bids and tenders to post the opportunity to all vendors that are interested. In the future state, we adopt a new standard, and the threshold is $120,000. So we'd increase to 120 under the new purchasing policy. Under non-competitive processes, in accordance with BPS, are there for unique circumstances where you can't always go for competitive processes. There's quite a few listed in the broader BPS, but I would just like to limit some key examples that are typically used here at TDSB. So obviously the first place where we do non-competitive sole source bidding is around emergencies. Those would be fires, floods, situations like that. There's also ones that we use sole source for their exclusive rights. So it could be vending software that only one vendor has the rights to that software. Health and safety obviously is an important place that we would use a sole source if appropriate. In addition, compatibility, there's certain either physical products or software where the compatibility limits it to a single vendor that can provide that. And then obviously single source in rare occasions where there's an absence of competition in that area. We do always, though, with all internal sole source, they go through an internal review process, depending on the level and threshold, and it could be as high as going to the director's office. In consulting services, these are, and again, consulting is different than professional services. This is really the area where providing strategic advice to an organization. So in the chart here, you can see that there's different values and different authority levels granted through the broader public sector guidelines. But this is typically around consulting for strategic advice as opposed to professional services. And then just finally, to give you a little outline of how much procurement we do through our purchasing department, this chart here shows you for the last few years what kind of value in millions of dollars that we are putting through our purchasing department as we procure services and goods for the board. When we talk about benchmarking as the work we did to do this purchasing policy, we also looked at the broader public sector guidelines, the Canadian Free Trade Agreements, the Canadian European Union Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreements to ensure we're in compliance with those. We also had our legal department review our purchasing policy to ensure that we are following the broader public sector guidelines and all legal considerations were taken into account in our new policy. And then we also benchmarked around other public sector organizations, a few of which are listed here on the slide. So I would like to go next and talk about our purchasing approvals as it currently states. And TDSB is one of the only large-scale organizations that incorporates a complex multi-level approval process for our contract awards. And as a result of this, we are looking to streamline this through our new purchasing policy to that only those contracts above $5 million would come to the board for approval. And this would be things like in the operational side would be if we're going to buy a new enterprise system, or on the construction side, obviously additions or new school construction. But we're hoping this will speed up our processes as we move forward. And this shows you our current approval authority grid for how we do approvals currently in the organization. And as you can see, there are multiple levels and approvals before it even comes to board or committee. So what we're looking for to help ease administrative processes is that the board, as you approve the annual operating budget of the board and you approve the capital budgets, within that are the approvals for those expenditures. So to speed up the process and looking at best practice across the Ontario school boards that are noted here, we would suggest that those approvals be done through operations and are not a governance issue. This would help us also increase our efficiencies in our purchasing department. It would speed up the time to procure goods and services, and especially in our construction area where prices are very volatile and very time sensitive. And it would give the purchasing staff time to work on bringing more vendors online, especially through our social procurement or Indigenous procurement, where we want to increase our vendor pool to support our stakeholders. And so we are suggesting at this point in time that contracts over 5 million would come to approval, and anything under that limit would be done operationally through approval processes internally. So I'd like to talk now to the purchasing policy changes themselves. So we are looking at the multi-year strategic plan as being our guidepost. And so we are making a commitment. In a moment, I'll speak to Indigenous procurement and social procurement objectives to ensure we're transparent and equitable in our practices and supporting our stakeholders and seeing representation in our vendors that we select. So the relevant highlights are that this aligns with the new purchasing directives for direct purchases. When we need to do direct purchases, it introduces total cost of ownership and ensure we're meeting the lifespan of assets and we're getting assets that last appropriate length of time for their use. As I said a moment ago, there's new Indigenous procurement and social procurement in here, as well as supply chain code of ethics for our suppliers as well as our staff, and then the rescission of the architect selection process that was in place previously. Oops, sorry, that hit the wrong button. So just gives a history on the purchasing policy. It was approved in 2001 and was last amended in 2005. In 2023, the review of the policy was brought to phase 4 with the rescission of the selection and was presented to the Governance and Policy Committee. And the Governance and Policy Committee recommended that staff involve the Integrity Commissioner, get a reference from the Integrity Commissioner around the architectural selection process, and ask for specific sections to be looked at for social procurement and Indigenous procurement. The committee also submitted notice for the consideration, I said, for diversity and social responsibility where feasible, and a review of that policy, which staff went and did. So the changes outlined in the new policy are as follows. So the first one is segregation of duties. So we are ensuring that there's proper segregation of duties following the BPS directive. We do have incorporated the supply chain code of ethics and ethical behavior. And this is both for staff, suppliers, and trustees regarding procurement and ensuring we're following the broader PBS guidelines and other appropriate TDSB policies. We are looking at our non-competitive purchasing processes and ensuring that in the policy that we have clear guidelines of when that's to be used when we're using single source or sole source requirements and or direct purchasing. Direct purchase is an area where typically right now we call these local purchase orders, and we're renaming it to direct purchases. And currently the limit is $3,500. And because it's been a long time since we've done this, we're raising it to $5,000. And this is to account for the inflation and changes in prices. And this is just where a school needs to purchase something. We still recommend they get 3 informal quotes over the phone, but they can do purchases for lowest dollar value as long as it's not repetitive purchases, not replacing a vendor we already have, and following our other guidelines. The other new change is that we can cancel competitive procurement if required and when required, should we decide that the RFP or other purchasing mechanism, we did not need it. Consulting services are following the guidelines as directed for the delegation of authority in PR 711, as well as the broader public sector guidelines, but that's clearly stated. And then again, it gives purchasing the ability to disposal of surplus assets of the board, such as chairs, tables, and other equipment that is no longer needed by the board. Purchasing can go through a disposal process. In architect selection for capital, we are recommending the rescission of the architect selection process that had trustees involved in the selection of architects. It does not limit the trustees to attending as an observer in the final interview of the architect that's selected. But we do feel that, and it still does allow the trustee and the local school community to work on the design with the architect once they're selected to ensure it meets the local needs of the school. But as we know with the benchmarks in the ministry's current standards around school builds, the flexibility in design is very limited. Another very important change is Indigenous procurement, and we're looking to reflect the board's commitment to truth, reconciliation, the calls to action, and the United Nations rights of Indigenous people to work to set up a procedure where our Indigenous vendors can better access ours and be a service to our students and to our communities. And so we're very proud of that, moving that forward. And then again, in social procurement, we realize that we need to have a wide variety of vendors that represent our communities and can support the needs of our communities and our schools. So we look at lowering those barriers to entry to be a vendor with the TDSB. In contract management, we are looking to establish a contract management system, which will house our contracts in a way that everybody that needs to access the contracts and view them and see them and have a contract life management cycle to them, so that we ensure we're being most effective, efficient, transparent in how we conduct ourselves with our contracts. We do, in the new policy, outline supplier requirements. So it establishes a supplier code of conduct and requirements that they abide under the BPS guidelines. And then some of the items that were removed, some of the definitions that were out of date have been removed to meet industry standards. There's been an inclusion of rationale and responsibility section in it. The procurement process for repair of music instruments has been deleted because it's not relevant. It can be under the procedure. Legal services have been incorporated in the new procedure as far as going forward. So it's been removed as an item within the purchasing policy. It'll be part of the procedure, as well as the approval authorities will be incorporated in the procedure because it's more dynamic there as things change with either trade agreements and or the broader public sector guidelines. It's easier to make those changes within the procedure. Facility services contracts, again, those procurement procedures will be outlined in detail within the procedures document. So those have been removed. We've updated the collaborative services so that we can, where there's going through the Ontario buys or going through OECM or collaboratively with other organizations, we've updated the wording to allow for that. We've removed the multiple areas of accountability for the new purchasing policy that were overlapping. And we've updated the exceptions in Appendix A for items that the policy does not apply for, such as utilities. And we've removed the examples consulting services, non-consulting services as well, because it was redundant. It will be part of the procedure as we move forward. So as we look at this, we're hoping that tonight you'll approve and recommend to board the approval of the purchasing policy. We will develop the accompanying procedures once the policy has been approved. We will update all our forms and applicable systems like the contract management lifecycle that we're currently working on. We'll obviously train our purchasing staff first on it. We'll train the senior management team and our department managers and staff so they're aware of how they react with the new policy. We'll update our website to highlight supplier opportunities. And this is an important one for us in that for both our Indigenous procurement, but also for our social procurement, that we understand bid and tenders, you have to subscribe to it, and there's a cost there. So we'll try to create in our web communications a site where the open items that we're requesting services or some goods for will be presented so that it's a less barrier for other groups to work with us. So we're going to work very hard on that. And then, of course, we'll do supplier outreach and communications so that our suppliers understand our new policies and procedures. And what we will do is finally, we'll do an operational review at the conclusion of the first year to see if the procedures are working as we expected. And we'll take feedback from our suppliers, especially in the areas of social procurement and Indigenous procurement, to ensure that we're hitting the objectives that we outlined, both in the policy as well as the procedures, that we are getting a vibrant community of suppliers to support the needs of the board. So through you, Madam Chair, myself and the team are here to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. Trustee McLean?
Thank you. And through the chair, can I assume that the reporting to FBEC would be the same? The threshold for that which would need approval would be raised, but we would still receive the reports in a timely manner at the monthly FBEC meetings about the decision that the team had made about the contracts that were approved?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's something we still need to discuss, and I'm happy to hear feedback from the trustees. We were thinking of doing maybe quarterly or semi-annually reports on the procurement that was done by the board to limit the one of the benefits of doing the contract awards the way we're suggesting is it'll limit the time that staff take to prepare those kind of charts in the future. So we're looking at maybe doing it quarterly or semi-annually was our thinking at this point in time.
Okay, we'll play with that for a little while. I'll leave that alone. Would it be, and I don't understand, so I will, through the chair, share that I don't completely understand the timeline that it always exists. So is there a chance that contracts could be awarded, the work could be done and completed before it gets reported on then in this semi-annual process?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes. I mean, for example, and I'll answer it in two parts. In the operational side, obviously contracts for things like paper supplies, photocopiers, the goods and services we use on a regular day basis would likely happen on a more regular basis than you would see the report. I mean, doesn't mean that, for example, photocopy paper, we would do a contract, for a couple of years at the high volume. We really only spend 3 months of the paper before you saw the first report. But for things like paper and operational things, you would see the report probably when the contract's already been let and some of the services have been provided. On the facility side, you would likely, in most cases, see the report while the work is just being initiated, where the drawings are being done or the site prep work is being done. So on the facility side, you're likely to see the report just as work is starting or just before you actually see physical work starting at the site.
Thank you. And through the chair, does the team then, I'm not worried as much about the purchasing of paper for the photocopiers as I am the $4.75 million facilities project that's happening in my ward that I don't know about. That becomes more problematic for me. Is there a concept around this that at least if we're not going to tell FBEC and the board about this only through a semi-annual process, that the local trustees would be made aware of these decisions so that their communities could be aware, they could be responsive to their communities in a manner so that you don't get the phone call that they're digging in our parking lot and we had no idea, and this sounds news to you as the trustee as you're getting it, is the kind of thing I'm concerned about. So are you waiting? Is that part of the procedure that you'll be working on, or have we given that some thought through you, Madam Chair?
So I'll start through the chair. So contract awards should not be where trustees are finding out about the projects that impact, especially construction projects that impact their schools. Contract awards is really the original intention, or the intention of bringing the contract awards was for trustees to understand the goods that we had procured and the method of procurement, but not necessarily that you would hear about construction projects first. And I know that Maya and her team do communicate regularly the projects that are happening in trustee wards, and we will make sure that that communication is strong and timely. What this will do is it will give staff the opportunity to move quicker on any project that is under $5 million. What we've noticed when we've looked back at the past 10 years of bringing contract awards forward, we have never had a contract award not approved. The questions that we get are more about the types of things that we're procuring, and rather than how and looking at approval. And we do believe that, again, contract awards shouldn't be where trustees are finding out about this information. So for example, if we have a new curricular support, we've had questions before about math programs that we're using, and we're having those questions through contract awards. And that should really happen through when we present the math report, and the department lets us know what the types of things that we're doing in order to improve student achievement. And similarly, for a capital project, it should be coming first through your connections with regards to your ward in the facilities department, but then also through the quarterly report that we get about all the capital projects that are going on, if we want to see it sort of board wide rather than ward specific. So we need to make sure that our communication of those things that we are purchasing, that we believe that trustees will be interested in, are communicated appropriately, but contract awards and approvals is not the right place for us to be communicating for the first time. So we do think that from an information perspective, it is, I think, important for trustees to see the volume that we're purchasing, the types of procurements that we're making, just so that you know that we are following the proper procedures. But when it comes to what we're procuring and the why, that wouldn't be appropriate through contract awards. And I know that that's what we have used it. I've noticed that in the past 2.5 years that I've been listening every month to contract awards, it was never necessarily about the procurement and those approvals. It was more about the why we're doing something. So I think that it's up to, we need to be better at communicating. And we certainly, I can turn it to Executive Officer Pachetti, but know that the communication of the projects that are happening across the board is something that is very important to her department.
Okay. And through the chair, as a reminder, this fall, one of the things that we did is make publicly available on our facilities webpage, and I can send the link around to all trustees again, the list of all the projects that is happening per ward, per school, with a status update of where they are in the process. And that list will be updated twice a year. And then the other thing that we've been doing, our practice is typically to go through the principal as our main point of contact for any project that's going to be starting at the school. And we do send out updates even over the course of the summer, and trustees are on those updates as well. So sure, we can improve that process. And I, welcome any suggestions on how we can tighten that up and make that information flow better. But that's what we currently have in place.
Okay, thank you. I'll say that I'm always better served when someone tells me something, as opposed to the concept that somewhere on our website, there's a diamond to be found if you're willing to dig far enough and deep enough to go find it. So I'm always better when someone shares with me. But I'll leave that alone for now. I do wish to share something that I suspect that I hear from my local community through the chair, from my local communities, that greater flexibility and a lower threshold about vendors and the ability to be able to deal locally with it, it will be something that will be very much appreciated at the local school level. They find it's rigid and problematic for them, and doesn't allow them to be as nimble as they would like, as cost effective as they would like, and they think that part of their process and limitations around the limited funding they get is because they have to, from their perspective at least, they have to overpay for what it is that they're going to get, because they seem there's usually better, they perceive at least that there's better local options that they'd like to be able to pursue. So a movement in that direction, I think, will be perceived as beneficial. So thank you for that.
Trustee Laskin?
Comments about communication. It has been through contract awards where we used to get an email to say, please note, schools are coming up. What I think might be helpful is if the facility team leads could connect with trustees monthly, even bi-monthly, to update them on the projects that are happening within their schools. And especially if one of the projects is not just happening inside the school, but outside the school, that will draw attention of community. I think that would be really helpful. Since the facility team leads have changed, I have to say, I don't even know who some of them are, to be completely honest with you. Maybe I don't have to know that as a trustee, but when you get comments from community, you're right. Our first point of contact is usually to the principal. But it just might be helpful on a regular basis if it came from them and not from us to them. I think I would find that helpful. My second comment, though, through you, Madam Chair, is I really appreciate the care in which this was written that draws attention to the legislation and the regulations that school boards as public bodies have to follow. I think it's full of good explanation about that. And having done procurement in my day job, I think it's complicated in terms of the different ways one can go out to get quotations. But it's important. The real message to this policy is we are a broader public sector entity. We follow the rules, but we are doing our best to make it easier for our schools. And we are not burdening the board with information that frankly is completely operational. So I do appreciate this. And then lastly, as one of the trustees who had the privilege of going through a flurry of school renewals and school builds a number of years ago, I was one of the ones that was very hesitant about not being involved in architect selection, because I know the importance of that relationship that the architect plays with the school community, with the principal. They really have to be joined at the hip during some of these builds. And some are better than others in terms of, they might be fabulous architects, but they're not so good at community engagement. But I absolutely understand the issue of perceived political interference. And I do appreciate the fact that we're not part of the actual voting selection, but there still is the ability to observe and establish that relationship, because when they're hired to work with your community, I have found it an incredible privilege to work with some of the architect teams through the process, and just help to ensure the community understands the constraints that the architects have to work under, and yet the amazing sunlight and different things they can bring into the building. So I understand how much work this would have been for staff, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Can I pass the chair to Trustee Laskin?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. My first question is just about the procedures, just a clarification about if this policy is approved, then which procedures then would be updated downstream of the approval?
So through you, Madam Chair, the primary will be our purchasing procedure, but we will be looking at our delegation of authority procedure as well, because there are interlinks between those two. But the primary one would be the purchasing procedure itself that lays out in more detail the operational aspects of the policy.
Okay.
Just wait 1 second. Did staff want to add?
You're the chair. Craig covered it.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And the other question I have, I'm not sure. I think in the consultations, we had some earlier discussions. We do have an adherence to the supply chain code of ethics and ethics in general, but and I know that all of our policies are framed in our equity policy, but looking at the supply chain code of ethics, this really seems to focus on business integrity and continuity, as opposed to maybe the behaviors of a supplier or their practices of their business. So I'm wondering how, if there's a mechanism for us through this new policy to do proper background checks or research or go back and research if something comes to light. If somebody identifies to us that a supplier that we're using has problematic practices that don't align with our multi-year strategic plan and our requirements under the Ontario Human Rights Code and the Education Act, because I think that's a big piece in the media right now about different companies and their shift away from what I would consider their ethics in terms of their employer ethics and how they treat people. I know that we have standards for trades like fair wage, but do we have does this provide us, or in the procedures will provide us a mechanism to ensure that our suppliers are bringing forward the same values that we have?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll ask Anita to take that question.
Thank you. Through you, the chair. So with the update of the policy, we are implementing contract management. A lot of the information that you mentioned is included in our solicitation documents, but with the update of the policy, we'll also be creating a new supplier management procedure, essentially, as part of the purchasing procedures to be created. That will include also declarations from the suppliers, getting more information, and then also a vendor management program in which if and when any issues do arise or complaints need to be made, that it can be made to purchasing services so that we can document, investigate, and then create the proper levels in terms of investigation and how to deal with the supplier.
Anything further?
No, but thank you very much. That's great. And I'll take the chair back.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions online? No? Do we have any further questions on the policy?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a lot of questions.
Okay. Go ahead, Trustee Pay.
Okay, number one. So I want the staff give me clarification regarding what is being revised regarding the policy PO17. What is part being revised? There are a lot of policy. Which part being revised? Which part you want to be approved?
So through the chair, there is a red line version that was attached that very clearly outlines what has changed in the policy.
Can you remind me, Associate Director? Is like which slide you're talking about? Which slide you're talking about? Which page of the report you're talking about?
It's Appendix I.
Agenda page 45.
Wait, sorry, agenda page 45.
Okay. All right. And also regarding the architect selection policy be rescinded. What that mean rescinded? You mean basically like remove this this policy?
So through the chair, we have used, or we have incorporated parts of that policy into this purchasing policy to have it all in one place. So that policy is no longer necessary, and so, yeah, it will no longer exist if it is rescinded.
Okay, all right. I want to ask some specific question regarding certain contract, you know, and I want to see what the changes really happening here. Just 1 second. Okay. So regarding the current approval authorities, I just want to go item by item. So for competitive, non-competitive consulting services, used to be you know, $0 to $50,000 can be approved by director, above $50,000 by board. What's changes here?
I'm just, through you, Madam Chair, I'd ask Anita if she could handle it. I'll just try to look up my screen why.
Through you, the chair, we have not proposed changes yet to the approval authority. We will include any proposed changes with the upcoming procurement procedure.
Okay. All right.
And-
What about the goods services? Non-competitive, 0 to 10,000. Like, you know, 10,000 to 50,000. Are we still keeping the same schedule for the goods and services regarding approval?
Sorry. So through you, the chair, for all approval authority for procurement, we have not yet revised any approval authority, and it would be proposed with the upcoming procurement procedure.
Okay.
Through the chair, that's for staff, right? The approval process for coming to board has changed.
Come to board is being changed. What been changed to come to the board? It's like over $50,000 doesn't have not to be approved by board anymore. So director have authority can approve anything.
So through you, Madam Chair, what we are suggesting is that staff, there be approval level set within the staff, depending on the level of the procurement and the type of procurement. It would be the director or associate directors or department heads, depending on the volume and the dollar amount. But that will be set up in the procedure as to what authority levels exist within each type of contract.
So, through Madam Chair, if I'm clear about this, is so the staff would recommend any trunk contract over $5 million will be approved by the board. Any contract less than $5 million, the board really have no business about it, right? Is this a staff position?
So through the chair, under the broader public sector procurement directive, that is what we are turning to, and that is what we are required to follow. And so that's correct. But trustees do approve the budget, so we wouldn't be able to go above budget. And you would approve this policy, which would say to staff, you have to follow these guidelines. So if we're following the guidelines and we're staying within budget, then I'm not sure what additional approval is required.
Okay, so Madam Chair, I think the trustees, we have a name of a trust, right? So we have ensured the trust for the public, and transparency and accountability is so important. So I think it's so wrong if we give staff, you know, the ability to approve contract without a limit. If you think about it, okay, if a capital project, $5 million, understand, okay? But if you consulting services, you say $5 million, up to $5 million, that's incredible high numbers. Why would like a trustee cannot approve, you know, why there's not need for trustee approval for such contract? Which is insane number, $5 million, up to $5 million for consulting company, consulting services.
Through
For you,
you,
Matt. Sorry.
through you, Madam Chair. I believe that the question has been asked and answered and has been covered in the presentation, Trustee Pei. I also believe that that the nature of the question calls into question the professionalism of staff. Associate Director Zucker has explained the parameters within which staff would operate, professional staff would operate, including the broader public sector piece here, as well as the approved budget and the other ways in which trustees provide oversight, which is in your capacity as trustees. Staff have gone through a thorough consultation process. This has been legally reviewed, and we believe that we are providing to trustees for your consideration an appropriate level of oversight that keeps trustees in that range of oversight, while allowing staff to conduct the business of the board without undue delays or undue hardship. Associate Director Zucker.
Thank you, and through the chair. So again, as we said, we would be following the BPS procurement directive. The BPS procurement directive indicates that anything over $1 million for consultants would come to board. And so that's where what we would be following. So again, it's not 5 million blanket. It's what it says that in the government directed broader public sector procurement directive. And so if it's helpful, I'm not sure, staff can tell us if it has been attached to the report, but if not, we are happy to share the directive, a link to the directive to trustees.
Okay, so Madam Chair, may I ask staff, how much consulting service were paid out for last year? What's the total number?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't believe we have that available tonight, but I would add another comment to what has been previously said, is that in my recollection, I don't think we've ever come even close to $1 million in consulting, because again, consulting is considered strategic advice to the organization. And we have used consultants to provide strategic advice, but it has never been anywhere close to $1 million for a contract on consulting. But we can do some digging to figure out how much we've done in consulting in the last year.
Through Madam Chair, I'm asking total number to
Trustee
staff.
Pei, we're
Yeah.
asking what's on the floor is the policy itself. Could you please keep the questions to the policy itself?
Madam Chair, I'm asking the question related to policy itself. If we
No,
had to
you're asking for
understand how-
budget information. You're asking for budget and expense information, which would be part of the FBEC, in the FBEC meeting
I
when
do
staff.
not agree with you, Madam Chair, because I'm asking the question related to the water policy change. The policy change is about numbers, so I'm asking a number of questions. So I'm allowed to ask a question on behalf of the public. The public have the right to know how much money last year TDSB spent on consultancy.
Okay, so
Why we need to make a
staff
change?
have answered that question.
No, staff have not answered me this question. Staff answer me is like, there's no contract close to $1 million.
Trustee
For a single
Pei,
contract. I'm asking
Trustee Pei, I
total number.
specifically asked trustees earlier this week, if you have questions outside that staff would need to prepare for, you need to send them in advance of the meeting.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, you just sent the email this afternoon. I only saw your email this afternoon, by the way. Okay. I'm a practicing dentist. I work from 9 to 4.
Trustee Pei, all trustees have day jobs or other commitments. It was sent earlier this week.
I understand, but
Please
I'm
keep the
asking
questions
legitimate
to the
questions.
policy.
Madam Chair, I'm asking legitimate question on behalf of the public interest. Why staff don't answer me the questions? The
Through the
staff have
chair,
the number,
staff is
or
happy to
I can
provide
give you
that
the
number,
number.
but we do not have it currently. So we will happy to provide that number at a later date.
So, through Madam Chair, I want our director, would the $22 million run bell to you? $22 million on consultancy last year.
No way.
Staff have indicated nobody has those numbers at the moment. This is not what's on the floor.
But that's what I heard in the past report, $22 million.
Through the chair, it is impossible that we have spent $22 million on consulting in the definition that Executive Officer Snyder provided, which is strategic advice to the board. So again, we will take that away and we will be happy to provide that number at a later date, but the number is nowhere near $22 million.
Okay, so nowhere to near $22 million. Okay, we spent $3.5 million on home assignment alone, right? For last 3 years for consultancy.
Through you, Madam Chair, Trustee Pei, asking questions that require responses with specific numbers at this point. Staff is not prepared to respond. If there are questions that the staff can take away and follow up on, we'll be happy to do so. However, Madam Chair, through you, the policy is the matter on the floor for discussion, and I would ask through you, Madam Chair, that the questions are directed to staff accordingly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Director. So through Madam Chair, may I ask the director, can staff provide me the number at a later date, maybe in a trustee update, regarding the total number, total amount of money we spent on consultancy for last 3 years?
If I can just clarify the question through you, Madam Chair. Trustee Pei, I'm just confirming that the question has changed. Earlier, you were asking about the quantum over the past year, I believe, and now you're asking the question about the past 3 years. Staff will take this away and can provide an update, perhaps through Trustee Weekly or another means. Thank you, Trustee Pei, and back to you, Madam Chair.
Okay, I want to move motion here as a business raising, especially regarding the consulting, contract, TDSB provided to the vendors.
Trustee Pei, business arising comes after the report is approved.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I will do that later. Thank you. I will vote against for this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, our governance staff, Mandrika, is asking if you could email her the wording of your business arising, please.
Isn't it in the agenda? 5.2. Oh, it's this.
Sorry, never mind. We had some confusion.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendations.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for that? Thank you. Could we, this is kind of red. Can we open the vote, please?
Naraja in favor.
Nunziata in favor.
Trustee against.
Trustee Ghost in favor.
Chan in favor.
Trustee Patel.
Trustee Patel in favor.
Thank you. Okay, that carries. Next on the floor is business arising from Trustee Pei. And sorry, it's not. Okay, so
Madam Chair, I have another business raising before this. because since I moved I want to move motion regarding getting the data for the breakdown for last 3 years regarding TDSB consultant services spending for the following items. Number one, total amount of money we spend on consulting company, consulting services. Number two, and any contract that's above $200,000.
Sorry,
And
trustee Pei, that would be a finance, that would be a motion for the finance committee. This is on the policy.
it's on policy.
If we just approve the policy, if you have a motion pertaining to policy,
Okay,
that would be a business arising. If you have financial questions, that would be appropriate for the finance, yeah, for FBAC.
what about the plan and priority committee? Can I submit my motion over there?
I believe that would
Because-
also then be directed to FBAC.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, now it's gonna, talk my business arising motion.
Trustee Pei, do you have a seconder?
Business rising. I think Trustee Patel.
So this one says trustee Hastings, but trustee Hastings is not a member of the committee.
Yeah, because
you need a
this one,
second.
because this one was a board at the business rising board meeting. And then I was referred by the chair and the vice chair that I should move my motion from the board to GPC.
Yes, but
So,
it would still need a seconder.
so I assume that if the chair and both chair and the vice chair recommend me to do that. at the board
Nunziata will
meeting,
second it.
Thank you, thank you,
Thank you, trustee Nunziata.
thank you, Trustee Nunziata.
I had to read it. It seems fine.
Okay, sorry, trustee Pei, did you want to speak to this?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Tonight, I bring forward a motion that is critical to ensuring accountability, transparency, and the fiscal responsibility at TDSB. Our policy on sole source contracts. As stewards of public funds, we must ensure that every dollar spent serves students, educators, and the families effectively. However, without the proper safeguards, sole source contracts, those awarded without a competitive bidding process, can lead to inefficiencies, inflated costs, and reduced public trust. My motion seeks to establish stricter guidelines for when and how sole source contracts are awarded. It will require, number one, clear justification. Sole source contracts should only be used in exceptional cases, such as urgent needs or when no other vendor can provide the required service. Number two, board oversight. Any sole source contracts exceeding a certain threshold, such as $50,000, must be reviewed and approved by the board to ensure due diligence. Regular reporting. The board and the public should have access to periodic reports on those contracts, fostering transparency. This is not about creating unnecessary red tape. It's about reinforcing trust by ensuring that TDSB procurement practices are fair, competitive, and accountable. We strengthen public confidence in our education system. I urge my fellow trustees to support this motion. Let's ensure that every financial decision as a TDSB is made in the best interest of students and the taxpayers. Thank you very much.
Questions from trustees? Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So we have just passed a policy where there is a definition of what a sole source contract is. We follow broader public sector guidelines. I don't think there's any more information required. Thank you. And to imply that trustees have to see it in order it is in order to be accountable and transparent implies that there is something that is happening that is not appropriate and transparent. And we've approved a policy. Staff are following the policy with the broader public sector guidelines. I believe anything else is undermining the professionalism of staff. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I speak?
No, you weren't asked a question. There was no question in there.
Thank you.
Yeah, is there any other question? Are there any other questions from trustees? Trustee Pay, do you want to make a closing statement?
Yes, I do, Madam Chair. We as a trustee, we make the policy. There is a trust in our name. We have to ensure that happening. I have to say, over the past 2.5 years, the public has lost quite a bit trust in us. So I want to ensure that we earn that trust back. So it's time for us to do it. Let's approve this motion. Thank you.
We'll open the vote.
Sorry, I have a question.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Sorry, it's Trustee Sriskanaraja.
Yes.
This is a question through you, Madam Chair, to staff. Could I just have more, and maybe it's beneficial to the public as well, because to be honest, I'm not very well versed on this particular aspect of the policy. Can we just get a bit more information on, I know that the definitions are in the policy, but how common are these contracts? Are they exceptional? I know, the definition says it's in certain circumstances. What are sort of those parameters that qualify for this? How often are we even doing these? Just to give the public a sense of, is there really, because I do think we got to address, I think, some of the public discourse right now is, and I think, the other trustees alluded to this, that something nefarious is happening. And of course, we want to prove to the public it's not. So I think more information would benefit all of us of how common this is. And if we could vote on this at Seriatim.
Through you, the chair. So currently the TDSB's or previous policy included non-competitive procurement as single and sole source. As the old policy hadn't been updated for quite some time, we've updated the terminology to non-competitive procurements so that we can include all different types of reasonings as to why these procurements happen. They are not a regular basis type procurement. We always go through competitive procurements wherever it is operationally feasible. However, non-competitive procurements are required in all organizations, which is why it is outlined in the BPS, the Broader Public Sector Procurement Directive, which does direct us to the CFTA, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement for limited tendering exemptions. Under these very specific exemptions is how we vet a non-competitive request to ensure that we are in compliance with all related legislation before going ahead and approving. The exemption codes, or sorry, not codes, but the exemptions are clearly defined in this limited tendering article, and that's what we do proceed with. However, if we can avoid a non-competitive procurement, then we will put out a competitive solicitation. So they are not as frequent. Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers prepared to support this information, but if it's required, we can provide this at a later date.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, could staff give some examples of where we have used or relied on these solar single source bids or contracts?
Yes, through you, the chair. Non-competitive procurements can be something to result for emergency purchases. One that we've used one for very recently, a few times in the last year, is the flooding that has occurred in different locations at the TDSB. There was not time to go through a regular procurement process to bring in vendors and suppliers to remedy the flooding that happened at 50/50, and I believe we had a few other school locations as well. So in that case, a non-competitive procurement is required so that we can pay the vendor.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So in that example, would this coming to board for approval delay from it to fix
Yes.
the flooding issue?
Through you, the chair, yes, it would cause delays if we could not proceed with a non-competitive procurement and would have to come to board for approval. It would cause significant operational delays, which I'm sure I can defer to Maya Puccetti to explain.
Thank you. And through the chair, not only would it cause delay, but there is a significant risk to the board in terms of deterioration of the building, the physical asset in this point, disruption to students, simply our ability to respond to an emergency such as a fire or a flood where we need a contractor to come and stabilize the emergency, deal with remediation and abatement and removal of materials. And that is typically what our emergency contractors would do. And then the work stops, and that gives us the time to figure out what else we need to do. And usually that follows our traditional procurement process, where we get either an architect involved or we go out to tender and get other contractors to reinstate the space, the building, the facility.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful, especially for the public, just to get an idea of when we do use this. I have a question for the mover, through you, Madam Chair. Just for clarity, is the motion not that the board needs to approve it before the fact, or is the motion that once this has been approved, or has happened, that a report comes to us with a description of it? I just would like clarity on whether this is just, are you asking for a description of it after the fact, as opposed to asking for an approval before the fact?
Yeah, as through Madam Chair, just answer, Trustee Sri Kandiraja's questions. I'm asking for approval. So the facts should be presented before approval. I want to make amendment based on, staff, recommendation. If the source sounds like based on, emergency, I would not ask a board for approval, but if it's non-emergency related services, that should require for board approval.
It's not our policy. All right. Okay, I'm going to ask a question of clarification for staff because we just recommended a policy to the board and actually think that
Yeah, point of personal privilege. Is any of this in order?
So that's what I'm going to ask. I actually believe B is in contradiction to the policy that has just been recommended to board. I actually don't think A would apply most of the time in the policy that we approved. But could staff please clarify if?
So through the chair, B for sure would be in contradiction to the policy that was just approved. It's quite significant. All contracts exceeding $500 per hour. That would be quite a few of our contracts. There'd probably be more approvals now than or with the passing of this than would be expected currently. So I wouldn't believe that B would be in order. And A, again, the way that I read it would only be when we bring something over $5 million that was a sole source. So that's the way that as staff I'm reading it. So A would be any sole source that was over $5 million, and B, I believe, would be out of order.
Today doesn't say that. It says all.
Through the chair, the way that I read A says that reports which present contracts to committees or the board for approval in the first line. So from my perspective, the only ones that will be coming to the board for or committee for approval are over $5 million.
So where are we? A business arising that contradicts the policy that we just recommended support.
Through the chair, I think as a chair, you can just determine, there was a question about whether something was in order or not. So you can make a ruling on that one.
So, yeah, I don't believe that B is in order.
A will come in.
A is what's essentially in the policy. Yeah. B is not in order at this point because it's not in keeping with the policy that we just approved, which uses the numbers provided by the government through the BTS. Sorry, do we have any other questions? Trustee McLean, you had a question. Any other questions, Trustee?
I do, thank you, and through the chair. Could staff please, in the isolated situation that was described around, the flooding and the immunity to act according, quickly and to respond. And I'm just looking for an anecdotal off the top of your head, non-committal, I promise not to quote you later type of thing. But I'm just trying to get at what would the approximate cost be of having to wait and not be able to respond immediately and having to go and, go through a lengthy process that allowed, continued deterioration to happen, and what would that, cost us?
Thank you. And through the chair, I think the cost would vary, but it could be, up to $1 million or more. It all depends on the extent of the emergency, how much of the space has been impacted, and then what we need to do with the students in the building. We have some emergencies where we have had to clear the students completely from the building and then find an alternative location for them. And that's the nature of an emergency. But we have had some emergencies where we've had a fire that happened in 1 or 2 rooms, but the firefighting actions actually damaged 6 rooms. And this is a school that had no capacity where to put students. If we had had to wait to remediate that space, those students would have been out of their classrooms arguably another 6 to 8 weeks. But because we were able to get in there with an emergency contractor to immediately start remediating the space and dealing with the abatement, et cetera, we were able to get the work started in there shortly after. And so the examples all vary, but they have both a capital cost or a renewal cost, but they also have a cost in the value of disruption to the students that these emergencies represent.
Thank you, and through the chair. And I just want to, publicly state that I, as a trustee of the board, am very grateful that we have talented professionals in place to make these calls in real time so that we can make these decisions, so that we can best protect the interest, the public interest of the dollars that are spent under the umbrella of public education, but that also serve students and families. So, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin.
I just want to, through you, Madam Chair, to make it clear what Associate Director Zucker said, the interpretation of A is now that the policy has been passed. I want to make sure that the mover of the motion understands that all TDSB reports which present to the committee or board for approval means, according to the policy, that is anything over $5 million. It is not all. It is because our policy has passed. It is what comes. So my question for staff is, because you would be bringing this to the board for approval, can I confirm that there would be an explanation of why it would be sole sourced, as you have done with every other contract that comes to the board that needs an explanation? There usually is an accompanying sheet that provides more detail. Would that practice change through you, Madam Chair, to staff, or would that practice be continuing?
Through the chair, that practice would continue, or we would provide an explanation. There's a pretty extensive process that in approvals that staff have to go through in order to get final approval for sole source or for non-competitive procurement. And that practice will continue, and the explanations provided to trustees will also continue.
Thank you. So to you, Madam Chair, to the movers, I just want to make it clear that in actual fact, this is a redundant motion. I'm happy to vote on it, but it's a redundant motion because it's asking for something that will already be done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I see no further speakers. Could we open the vote, please?
No, Madam Chair, can answer Trustee Laskin's questions or comments?
Okay, you can
Because also I had to remind Madam Chair is I made an amendment regarding my motion. This is approval only for non-emergency contract.
It doesn't matter.
Sorry.
$5 million.
Yeah, the things for approval, I don't believe the emergency or non-emergency applies to A. And B is out of order with respect to the policy that the committee just passed.
He doesn't.
It's also out of order with respect to the broader public sector procurement got directives from the government.
I don't think he understands.
So, Madam Chair, you're saying I cannot make an amendment for my motion?
He doesn't understand.
Sorry, you want to add an for non-emergency, but it's not required. It's not required. That definition isn't required. It won't actually make a difference to A.
Okay. All right then. May I make some comments to Trustee Laskin's comments?
We have trustee Siskarndolaja on the list and again, and then you can make a closing statement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I just have a question to the one of the last points that were made. Through you, Madam Chair. It was mentioned that that the Part B would be in contradiction to what the ministry, the benchmarks the ministry sets. I just have a question to staff, to the chair. Are those benchmarks sort of just that, just sort of the ministry's sort of number, but then can we lower that number as a board, right? I understand we couldn't increase the number, right? So we couldn't make it a larger number, a dollar value, but could we make it a smaller dollar value?
Through the chair, yeah, trustees have the ability to be lower, but as you indicated, not higher.
Okay. So the trustee, I understand why it's out of order right at this moment, but we as trustees could change the benchmarks. Through you, Madam Chair.
Through the chair, absolutely, trustees may, but I think the reason that it's out of order is because we just approved a policy which had numbers in it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Trustee Pei, closing statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to make a specific comments, to Trustee Laskin's comments. Trustee Laskin said, okay, the board has a policy and we should not make new policy. I think that is fundamentally is wrong. We're new trustees. We are here to make new policies. We are here to make the change of the policies because we represent the public interest. So we are here to govern. We're here to ensure transparency and accountability happen at TDSB. So that's our job, to ensure that is happening, because the public were not very happy with our performance for last 2.5 years. We made so many missteps. Even the past minister of education direct us to make a speedy review regarding our lottery system just because we didn't do a proper review, we didn't do a proper consultation process. We have the grass narrow. Field trip turn demonstration happening with the student led by activists chanting.
Sorry, Trustee Pei, what does this have to do with your motion?
Because
you can make closing comments on your motion, please.
Madam Chair, what I'm making is comments is against the trustee Laskin's comments that
sorry, we don't have back and forth with trustee to trustee in the boardroom. You make closing statements on your motion, please.
Okay, Madam Chair. Like I said, I come to the board to ensure the board is transparent and accountable. I'm going to do that every single day, every single hour, every single minute when I'm at this board. So I hope my trustee can vote for this motion to ensure transparency and accountability to the Toronto public. Thank you.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. I still don't fully believe that there is comprehension about what this motion will or will not do. I am concerned that
point of order, Madam Chair. I thought I made a closing comments, and that should be end of a discussion.
Yes, thank you. Can we open the vote, please?
Trustee Pei in favor?
just to be clear, a request for ad seriatim was requested for, well, we're left with 1 and 2. Or, okay, sorry, it was A and B.
I can cancel it.
Yeah, can you cancel it? So give us a second to redo that.
No.
Okay. Thank you. On screen and, excuse me, can we open the vote, please?
Trustee Patel in
Trustee Fay,
favor.
Ziada in favor.
Trustee Shan, Trustee Siskandraja,
In favor. I'm a bit confused on the vote, but in favor. Trustee Ghost in favor.
Trustee Shan. Thank you. That carries. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is the Bylaws Review Subcommittee. And am I turning this over to Trustee Laskin?
Madam Chair, the report, I believe, is self-explanatory. I don't think it needs much debate. Thank you.
Yes, it's always.
Okay. You don't need to vote on it. Okay. So there's.
Sorry,
vote on
Madam
this
Chair.
question, but are there any questions on?
Sorry, Madam Chair. I'm not on committee. May I ask a question? How this committee been formed, by the way? Because I really have a question regarding the process of selecting committees. I never heard anything regarding this committee. I never heard about this selection process happening. So who are those committee members? How those committee members be selected? Are we electing those peoples, or is when the election happening?
Yeah, Trustee Laskin, could you, as the chair of the committee, could you please give us?
Thank you very much. The committee members were selected at a board meeting, and they were selected by the members of the board that were present at the meeting. And the committee's now met twice. And the meetings are open to any other trustee that would like to attend, and the agendas are posted publicly. And they were all acclaimed. Thank you.
Through Madam Chair, may I ask Trustee Laskin is which board meeting, by the way? I'm not aware of this board meeting.
I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
Can staff provide the information through you, Madam Chair?
Yeah, just, sorry? Yeah, just a second. We're looking it up. It was either December or January. I can't remember. January, sorry. It was the January board meeting.
Did you hear that, Trustee Pay? It's the January board meeting where this was decided.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry I wasn't at the meeting. And I understand that Trustee Laskin, you said that this report is self-explanatory. So are you the chair of the committee?
Yes, I was elected chair of the committee at the first meeting of the committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Through Madam Chair, may I ask the chair of the committee, Trustee Laskin, just give up a brief summary, a synopsis regarding this report before we can vote on?
Sure, but I would have anticipated you would have read it in the agenda, but I am happy to do so. We talked about the preliminary process for reviewing the bylaws and the complaint process work. We decided that we were meeting bi-weekly and we were dealing with the complaint process first. And that we also asked staff if they could prepare a timeline. And if you notice the agenda, we met again today, but we'll report on that at the next meeting because the committee reports through this committee. That timeline was in the agenda of today's package for the meeting. Thank you. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lasky. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee McLean.
Thank you, and through the chair, it's also worth noting that trustees who are not on the committee are free to attend and participate in the committee's meetings. So if the trustee has missed the opportunity to formally be on the committee, all trustees are welcome to attend and share their thoughts and contribute to the discussion.
Thank you very much. This was for information only. If there's no more questions, then we will move on to items under number 7, which are staff reports. And the first one is 7.1, P057, Employee Conflict of Interest Policy Review, Phase 1. And who's speaking to this?
That would be me.
Oh, go ahead, Associate Director On.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'll be really quick. This is phase 1 of our proposal to start a review of the employee conflict of interest review. Again, not much of substance at this stage, just to advise you, this is a 17-year-old policy. It does need review. We're aiming to complete and present another draft of the policy by the end of the school year. And that's about it. Thank you.
Sorry, do we have any questions on this policy review? This is for receipt or approval. Sorry. Oh, sorry, we need a mover and a seconder.
Happy to move it, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can we open the vote, please? The vote is open.
Anziata in favor.
Trustee Goes in favor. Trustee Navarro in favor.
A in favor.
Trustee Patel, Trustee Shan. Oh, sorry. Okay,
Patel in favor.
thank you. That carries. Thank you very much. Next is item, oh, we're already there, 7.3. Implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada Calls to Action and United Nations Declarations of the Rights of Indigenous People. And
so through the chair, I'll start off.
oh, thank you very much.
Thank you. I wanted to take the opportunity to correct a statement that was made at board on Wednesday, February the 19th during the presentation on the school renaming report. I incorrectly stated that the Indian Act had been repealed. In reality, while the Act has been revised and amended many times since its introduction in 1876, it has not been repealed. Given the profound harm that the Indian Act has inflicted on Indigenous communities, I wanted to apologize to the elders and the Indigenous communities for any harm that particular statement may have caused. Part of coming to this evening was that I wanted to raise this evening, as this was the first opportunity to do so as part of a public meeting. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to legal counsel, Ms. Seville, in order to continue this presentation.
Good evening, trustees, and through you, Chair. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge System Superintendent Sank and invite her to make any remarks.
Thank you, and good evening, and through you, the Chair. This conversation is about our commitments that we made in a resolution in June of 2022 to the implementation of Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as the framework for reconciliation moving forward as outlined.
Thank you, System Superintendent Sink. This report follows from the board's resolution on October 9th, 2024, asking that the director provide a report on the progress of implementing the TRCs and UNDRIP in TDSB policies, bylaws, and board governance structures, taking into account.
I understand that. I'm just saying that this has also paved the way for the multi-year strategic plan. My internet seems to be unstable. Did you hear that?
Yeah, sorry, you froze for a moment.
I
So
will
could you-
now turn it to you through the chair to Jennifer Saville.
Thank you very much, System Superintendent Sink. The report follows from the board's resolution in October 9th, 2024. Trustees specifically requested that the director come back with a report on progress in implementing the TRCs and UNDRIP in TDSB policies, bylaws, and board governance structures, taking into account the relevant legislation and the Education Act. Trustees specifically requested A, options for including an Indigenous trustee on the Toronto District School Board, and B, an update on implementing board direction to open the Boyne Natural Science School as an Indigenous land-based learning site. A comprehensive update on the implementation of the TRCs and UNDRIP in board policies, bylaws, and governance structures will be incorporated into the annual Indigenous Education Report being submitted to the Program and School Services Committee. The report will detail the implementation of the TRCs and UNDRIP in development and delivering programs and services to students, staff, and communities across our board. Going forward, an update on the implementation of the TRCs and UNDRIP will form part of the annual Indigenous Education Report. In advance of this year's Indigenous Education Report, 2 specific updates are being brought to board tonight, or this committee, I should say. The first is the options for including an Indigenous trustee on the Toronto District School Board, and second, an update on implementing the Boyne River Natural Science School as an Indigenous land-based learning site. As you will see from the report before you, in brief, the answer is that TDSB cannot appoint an Indigenous trustee under the existing framework. The Education Act only allows for the election of trustees, with one very important exception. An Indigenous trustee may be appointed by a First Nations band council if the school board admits pupils from the First Nation band who ordinarily live on reserve. A trustee appointed by a band council would have all privileges of an elected trustee. I do want to note that a board member appointed by a First Nations band council is not included in the calculation of the number of members of a district school board. In other words, a school board which has hit the cap of 22 trustees, such as TDSB, would not be breaching this cap where a First Nations band council appointed an Indigenous trustee as the 23rd board member. Meaningful legislative change is needed in order to ensure that the right of Indigenous representation on school boards is fulfilled for TDSB's urban Indigenous students. The Education Act fails to acknowledge the reality of off-reserve First Nation students who live in Toronto, and it fails to acknowledge that urban Indigenous peoples and urban Indigenous communities are a distinct demographic with unique educational and cultural needs. With respect to the second question as to whether or not TDSB can establish an Indigenous Standing Committee, the answer is yes. TDSB can, in fact, establish an Indigenous Standing Committee. A standing committee can be composed in 2 ways. The first is members of the board with respect to recommendations to the board in respect of education, finance, personnel, and property. The second way is persons who are not members of the board in respect of matters that are not education, finance, personnel, or property. In our view, An Indigenous Standing Committee could be established by ensuring that the Standing Committee is composed of persons who are not members of the board. I will now turn it over to Executive Officer Pachetti to discuss the Boyne River National Science School.
Thank you. And through the chair, in the report, we do provide a little bit of historical context regarding what was then the Boyne River Natural School. And when in 2017, trustees approved future use of the Boyne as an Indigenous land-based learning center. Another important milestone is that in 2020, the site gained royal assent to restore its institutional use and designation for Indigenous cultural and recreational purposes. So one thing to note is that ministry approval is required for any renewal work of an outdoor education facility. And in 2021, following the board's approval to re-envision or the use of the Boyne to open up the Ecology Center for day visits, the board did send a letter to the Ministry of Education requesting approval to do repairs and renovations to the Ecology Center. That was in 2021. In 2022, we did receive approval from the ministry for up to $3.3 million of school renewal allocation to go towards renovating the Ecology Center. And the budget changed from what was submitted originally in 2017 because a more detailed condition study was done of the Ecology Center, noting that the water and septic systems need to be replaced. And prior to starting that work, staff were asked to look at the entire complex, all the buildings at the Boyne. So this report provides you with a summary of the findings from the architect. Unfortunately, the buildings that are at the Boyne are in poor condition, as are some of the systems that would be needed to support those buildings. And another thing that was noted is that the existing dormitories are not suitable for an Indigenous learning facility and for students because the large dormitory rooms are too reminiscent of the dormitories that were found in residential schools. So the architect looked at what are the options for renovating some spaces within the existing buildings to create shared individual sleeping rooms for between 2 to 4 students, as well as accommodation for staff. The report provides you with 3 options. So the architect was asked to look at, well, what would it take if we just renovated the main assembly building and created some sleeping accommodation rooms for students? And that's in a table in the report. So up to 42 students if we renovated the main assembly building. And then if we did the main assembly building and one of the dormitories, converted that, and then finally looking at the entire facility. The cost is quite high. It is $44 million to rebuild and renovate the existing buildings, to open up the full facility as it was before, including, you know, the water, septic, repairs to the dam and the bridge that are part of this site. We would need ministry approval to spend this amount of money, and we'd need to find a funding source because this would exceed anything we have available through school renewal allocation. So working with System Superintendent Sank, there are conversations happening with the folks who run our outdoor education program to see if there are other options, whether in fact we could only open the ecology center, which can only accommodate students for a day visit, which means they would be on the road for at least 3.5 hours, which makes a very tight program that could be offered during the day for those students, whether there are other options to offer the program at other education facilities or other sites. So at this point, we're waiting to see whether or not the ecology center work should be started, and that would be work that would start in the spring. You have to wait until the conditions, weather conditions improve. And at this point, the buildings do remain closed until such time as funding is secured and approved.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I would invite Systems Superintendent Sank and Executive Superintendent Spiropoulos to make any remarks.
System Superintendent Sink.
Yeah, thank you. Through Chair, I just want to reiterate what's been said. I know that we've been working very hard for the past several years to ensure that we can start the Boyne as an Indigenous land-based site, center for Indigenous education, not just for Indigenous students, but all students, and to explore the many options there, potentially working in phases, starting with the ecology building. There have been discussions that there could be overnight camping, as we would be able to possibly do some of the repairs as was outlined, and to the ecology building for septic as well as running water. And for overnights, working out a possibility of the monocliffe, which is only 16 kilometers away. The Boyne has been used for day visits in the past. Students have gone there and have returned home later in the day. And this is something that I know most definitely that has been a priority for the Indigenous communities that we serve through the Urban Indigenous Community Advisory Council, and certainly for the elders, understanding that the situation is a very difficult one and is quite complex. So thank you for the report and the update, Maya Pachetti and Miigwech. And we're just hoping that we can develop that particular site starting in phases. Miigwech.
So thank you very much. First on the speakers list, we have Trustee Shan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of Trustee Earhart, I would like to move a motion to receive the report, but also move us towards some immediate action that we can take as our commitment to truth and reconciliation and the work that we do continues. It's important for us to continue to commit ourselves to action. And so Trustee Earhart will probably speak a lot more on each of these items as she has worked very hard to consult and get input and feedback and direction and advice, both from Elders Council as well as from our staff leading this work, including Superintendent Seng and Executive Superintendent Spiropoulos. I do think that, you know, in my conversation with Elder Redbird and as well as Superintendent Sang, you know, it was very clear that you know there's been delays, that some of these delays were not easily explainable, and I'm glad that we got some legal opinion on the matters related to Indigenous trustee position. But I do think that there is a way for us to advocate. You know, Education Act is written by people. It is not something that needs to be considered to be final. There has been a number of amendments that have been made to Education Act, and I think it's important for us to challenge what is there to make sure that Indigenous communities in urban setting, particularly as the largest school board that has significant number of students who are from Indigenous communities, get the representation that they deserve through principles of self-determination and sovereignty. So I think asking for the Ministry of Education to take the necessary legislative amendments to allow that level of representation for students that are of reserve is critical. And then obviously the next part of the motions talks about the other form in which that while we advocate, we don't wait around for what the province would say. There are a couple of ways that we could do what we can in the meantime. One of them being the Standing Committee on Urban Indigenous Education that will have immediate impact on us getting direct support and guidance and advice, and making sure that all issues that we deal with have a framework that we can look at from UNDRIP and Truth and Reconciliation commitments. And then there is also part E that looks at possibilities of a representation with us at the board to continue to remind us of our commitment and also to guide us through our processes as we make decisions from Indigenous perspective and reflecting on our commitment to truth and reconciliation. So I do think the motion is self-explanatory in multiple ways. And then the issue around Boyne Natural Science School or outdoor education site, for land-based learning site, I do think that we need to take it to FPAC and we need to figure out what are we as a board able to commit, what should we advocate for to make it happen. It's also something that has taken quite a bit of time to figure out how much it's going to cost and what the amounts are. And now that we have some idea or a little bit firmer idea around what this would look like, I do think that we need to figure out, we cannot go to other levels of government until we are very clear that we would have to do what our share of this work is to begin that process at a site that's been requested by Elders Council and the leadership that guides us. So I'll stop with that, and I'm assuming Trustee Laskin is able to second this. I should have asked that first, and Trustee Laskin has agreed to second it, I think. And then if I can, with your permission, Trustee Arts, if I can ask Trustee Erhard also to add to the motion's explanation.
First, Trustee Erhard, did you want to speak to this?
Thanks. I can defer to the seconder to start if that's okay. Take care.
Go ahead.
No problem through you, Madam Chair. I will not repeat what Trustee Shan said. I think the very first point was very important, that this is not a trustee motion brought without consultation from both the Elders Council and Executive Superintendent and Superintendent. I think those points are really important because I don't think we ever want to be in a position of from the board perspective of creating something and bringing it to, as opposed to nothing about us without us. So that principle holds in this motion. And I appreciate the work that Trustee Erhard did on this. I appreciate some of the tweaks that were made to this. And we heard a lot about what we can't do. The Education Act is clear. Some of the other legislative requirements are clear in terms of what we can't do. But in addition to A, B, C, and D that was spoken about, E is something we can do. And it may take a little bit of really figuring it out. But I think with goodwill and by working together, we can figure out how to move part way to our overall intention, which is actually to have the Education Act changed so that urban Indigenous populations can be represented through trustees around a board table. In the meantime, we can seek advice from the Elders Council and the Urban Indigenous Community Advisory Committee for representation that could sit with us around the board table within the confines of the Education Act and come up with appropriate and meaningful responsibilities so that the voice of the community is heard in real time as we discuss important agenda items in the Toronto District School Board. So I am honored to second this and hope we have the trustees' support. Thank you very much.
Trustee Earhart?
Thanks very much. There's been much said by the mover and the seconder, for which I'm very grateful. There's also been a great deal of work over many years by elders, by the Urban Indigenous Community Advisory Committee, by staff, by trustees present and former around these matters. So I just want to acknowledge that and note that this motion is very procedural, building off of what we received in the report. There is still work that I'm hoping we will receive that speaks to our original motion of October 9th through annual reporting. I'm very pleased to hear that's coming through annual reporting, but I am waiting to better understand that frame that we will see in annual reporting. I'm looking forward to that. So procedurally, this motion has many parts, but each part takes us down the path because there is no smooth, clear-cut option right now around Indigenous representation. And so we do need to look at a few different options because of, frankly, the red tape that exists in this area at this moment. So I do see there to be an opportunity to engage with the ministry. The word here is advocate, and the first recommendation, and advocacy can take many forms. It is simply to speak out and to start to speak in favor of, and in this case, an outcome. It's not prescriptive of exactly how that outcome is achieved, and we give great flexibility and open dialogue. So it's not saying let's write a letter, as many of ours have. It's sort of opening up space for dialogue, which I think could be very positive in this instance. And that we begin the work on some of the other elements that are here without necessarily choosing which one at this time, because we are able to work on each in their own way. I note for Boyne Natural Science School, it does note to refer to FBAC, which is an appropriate committee for that discussion, and notes that we'll be sharing the report and recommendations with Elders Council UICAC for ongoing input in support of the recommendation. And so moving very much together would be our hope. I'm happy to also answer any questions and grateful for everyone's commentary, engagement, and support of this motion. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Trustee McLean?
Thank you. And through the chair, I will note that the Education Act has, as Trustee Shan had shared, the Education Act has been modified multiple times, and I certainly support the notion that we would continue to advocate that work continue and get expanded to broaden the ability of the Indigenous community and representatives throughout the board to be able to make a more meaningful contribution to the decisions that are being made in real time. I'm excited about E in that it has a deadline that a target at least for us to work towards. We have been talking for years around ways to try to accomplish ways to do that and to create a mechanism that while debate is ongoing and decisions are made, that the instead of telling us after the fact that there was a particular point of view we forgot to mention or we forgot to consider in our well-intentioned debate, that point could be raised while we were having the debate, and we would be able to make better choices and better decisions that better served all our students, instead of learning that after the fact, you know, there might have been an option we didn't consider, or there might have been an angle we didn't fully appreciate, or a ramification as it gets extended out that is problematic for some that we didn't bear in mind. So I'm very excited by this, that we're moving forward, that we're continuing to work with the UICAC and the Elders Council to make the voices of the Indigenous community of the TDSB heard more often and in a way that better serves all the students of the TDSB. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. Trustee Laskin, can I pass the chair?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
I just want to express my gratitude for the work, for the background research, for the work and the advice that we've gotten through the elders and the Urban Indigenous Advisory Committee, and the community there that is so dedicated to the students in the TDSB. I'm really glad I wish the legal advice had been something, I wish there had been a loophole that, that in the Education Act that would have gotten here, or, pie in the sky thinking that the Education Act was actually constitutional. But I think that is something to work towards, and I feel very hopeful, both on the advocacy level. I feel hopeful in having all this new and deep information, and this work, that I and my colleagues can be better informed to really better support the students and families, Indigenous students and families in Toronto, and support them in advocacy for the representation that they are asking for and that they deserve. And yeah, I am really looking forward to the coming work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll pass the chair back.
Thank you. Trustee Payne?
So, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I want to appreciate, staff have done, really hard work, producing this report. And also I acknowledge that this process of reconciliation is so important. And I appreciate TDSB taking steps to further the calls to action. But I do have some questions. I would raise some concern about passing this motion to advocate to ministry without understanding what it really would involve. And so I want to ask, the mover and seconder, have you ever thought of what kind of a procedure or policy change involved into this process? Are we following the Education Act? Are we running the risk into a violation of Education Act without the ministry approval? Because I heard from the staff that appointing a 23rd trustee is just violation of the Education Act. So I wanted, more and seconder answer my question here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, if it's possible for me to respond.
Yes, please go ahead.
When we say we are advocating for a policy change, legislative change, we are actually in serious nature asking to change it. We are not breaking the rule, we are actually asking to change the rule. In fact, that is what advocacy will do. So Education Act at this point does not permit an urban indigenous communities to have a representation at the school board as an indigenous trustee. So what we are asking right now, Trustee Pei, through you, Madam Chair, is that we would like the ministry to consider that the Education Act currently does not recognize the indigenous students and their right to self-determination, their right to representation, their right to sovereignty, their right to having their concerns addressed in the same way that it does for students, communities on reserve. So the request is being done through advocacy. So I don't think any level of government would consider advocacy towards legislative changes be against the law. In fact, it is actually how law gets shaped, how legislation gets shaped. In fact, we constantly write for other issues as a board to change things in the Education Act to have it be more reflective and responsive and adaptive to the changing needs of our student populations and communities and the learning environment. So this is in no way different from that. In fact, this is kind of primary to the kind of commitment that we have for truth and reconciliation, to be continuously advocating to change legislations that were created many, many years ago in many situations that have been the major problem. So advocating for change for Educational Act is not seen as breaking the act. In fact, it is part of the way how the government operates.
May I add? And thank you very much. Further to your point about we would be in violation and it wouldn't be appropriate to add a 23rd trustee. The motion is not adding a 23rd trustee. I want to be crystal clear about that. And this wording has been passed through legal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to, through you, I want to ask, more and seconder. But in the this motion part B, the board began the work on the standing committee on urban indigenous education. So I'm just wondering, what's the purpose for the board to start initiate this type of work? Is that the type of work that started to form a committee that is non-board members, and then start making recommendation to the board that indigenous trustee should be appointed? Is that the purpose for the motion part B?
Through you, Madam Chair, Part B is a way to address the need to have increased representation of indigenous communities in our decision making. So in the absence of the possibility to have the indigenous trustee, this is one of the ways in which the voice and the guidance and the advice can come from representatives of indigenous communities to the Board of Trustees in a way that is more direct, more impactful than the current structures that we have. So I don't know if Trustee Erhard wants to add more onto it.
Thank you, through the chair and also with respect to Chair Shan. The motion indicates to begin the work, which would mean to contemplate a purpose and composition. It doesn't predetermine any of that because it would require discussion. And so it's to allow for that discussion. And I would note that we currently have committees of the board, for example, our audit committee, which has non-trustee members. So there is, this already occurs in line with the Education Act and with good governance principles. And so it would, I would assume, and I would intend through this motion for all of that to be taking place. So we're not, all of that would have to come forward for an actual standing committee to be implemented through our board. It would have to come forward through another motion and through another process and may require bylaws changes. All of that would need to be explored and we would need to get advice on that before we would contemplate that. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, so Madam Chair, I'm really confused. The seconder told me that, okay, this is not about a, appointed 23rd, trustee at the board. And the mover told me that, okay, this is about the process that's, seeking that is whether the board can make a recommendation to appointed 23rd trustees. So I'm really confused, like, are this motion about any potential work towards appointing a 23rd trustee? If so, is this violate Education Act?
I believe the answer is no. This is
Sorry, Madam Chair, I'm not asking you. I'm asking the seconder and the mover. Can you
I'm
allow
happy
them
to answer through you,
answer?
Madam Chair. There is nothing in this motion in any of the 5 parts that is in violation of the Education Act. The goal of advocacy is to work towards changes. While we work towards changes, a standing committee can raise and amplify the voices of the Indigenous community around the table. And E seeks to have additional representation as we discuss motions and all the actual details of which are yet to be determined. But there is nothing in A through E that violates the Education Act. And that's been confirmed by legal.
Okay, I just want to ask the legal opinion regarding appointing a 23rd trustee at the TDSB.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The motion before the committee does not make that recommendation. That said, this board cannot appoint a 23rd trustee, but I do want to clarify that the motion before us does not make that recommendation. I do want to make clear that the motion is in line with the board's duties under the Education Act.
Okay, so Madam Chair, so I want to have staff opinion on this motion. So the staff said is this motion virtually comply with all is Education Act, all the requirement of Education Act.
Thank you, and through the chair, yes, it meets the requirements of the Education Act.
Okay. So basically this motion is about like advocate to change the Education Act, if I understand, right? So the board can increase the number of trustees. Is this a first step?
Through you, Madam Chair, Trustee Pei, I'm unclear about the question that you're asking.
So, okay, assume Madam Chair is, yeah, Ms. Director. So I want to understand about the motion a little bit more. So is this a motion is really about advocating to change the Education Act so that the board can move forward, increase the number of trustees? Is this the first step what the board is doing right now?
Yeah, so yes, this is a first step in advocacy.
Thank you. And through the
Trustee
chair, as I understand the motions and certainly would leave it to the movers, there are 5 parts to this motion, working in parallel at the same time to ensure that urban Indigenous voices are heard and that this board respects those voices.
Okay, I just want to have that clarification one more time. So this is motion is the first step that we as a board to advocate to ministry to change the Education Act so that the board of TDSB can increase the number of trustees from 22 to 23. So this is the first step.
For you, Madam Chair. Ultimately, Trustee Pei, through whatever advocacy TDSB might do, it would be ultimately up to the ministry how they choose to respond to increase the opportunity for Indigenous voice in the education process as it relates to the education of urban Indigenous students. And the ministry could consider increasing the number of trustees to allow a board like TDSB that is at the max presently at 22 trustees to increase that number to beyond 22. The ministry could also consider through their frameworks, including legally, any other opportunities to increase Indigenous voice. I believe that what this motion speaks to, and certainly it's up to the movers to confirm that, is to really advocate for the ministry to consider ways that Indigenous voice can be increased so that Indigenous students in TDSB can be well represented in a board like TDSB as they are in boards that have other frameworks for that level of voice and representation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Director. I have a question for the mover. I would say is, so the mover is putting forward a motion for us to advocate, but the mover is not answering my question, but as what we are asking for specifically to the ministry. So I want to really have a clear answer for that before I can really support this motion.
Madam Chair, through you, it clearly says to allow for urban and off-reserve Indigenous communities to have the same right to representation as on-reserve Indigenous communities. That's what we are asking. It's not about the number of trustees being added. It's not about adding 22. We are not asking to change from 22 to 23. As we heard, adding an Indigenous trustee through the agreement that exists already for on-reserve Indigenous communities does not count toward the limit according to the legal input. So basically, it is not about the number, it's about the representation. So the advocacy is to ask the ministry to change the Education Act through legislative amendments that allow for urban and off-reserve Indigenous communities to have the same right to representation as on-reserve Indigenous communities. Because as on-reserve Indigenous communities have right now, Indigenous trustees are able to be appointed from those communities in other school boards, whereas as TDSB, we do not have the same type of we don't have the Education Act does not allow us to do the same thing for an urban off-reserve Indigenous communities, and that's the change that's being requested. So it's very clear what is being requested from the first line.
So this is a motion basically to make a meaningful amendments for unreserved and off-reserve student to have the same rights. But the unreserved student have representation rights because they can vote for trustees. And off-reserve community
Sorry,
have voting
Trustee
rights for
Pay, Trustee
trustees.
Pay, you're out of time.
Can you
Trustee
put
Pay,
me
you're out of
back?
time.
Chair, thank you.
Okay, I need a motion to extend the meeting. I need a seconder. I don't know how long. this can take. How long would you like to extend for?
I believe our bylaws say a half an hour.
Okay, yes. I need a motion to extend for half an hour. I have Trustee Laskin. Do I have a seconder?
Trustee Gross?
Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. The next speaker on the list is Trustee Shan.
Sorry, I was going to respond to the initial thing, so I've answered. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Trustee Earhart.
I can waive. Thank you.
Trustee Pay.
Yeah, Second Amendment, Chair. I think the motion is to make a meaningful amendments for unreserved and off-reserve students to have the same rights. But unreserved students have representation rights because they can't vote for trustees. And off-reserve community have voting rights for trustees. So is this asking for urban off-reserve student families to have additional rights, a trustee, and voting rights that unreserved community don't have. So I just understand from the legal point of view, how do we reconcile this?
It has nothing to do with voting rights.
Yeah, can Executive Officer?
Thank you, and through the chair. On reserve, individuals, communities do not vote for TDSB trustees because they do not reside within the jurisdiction of the Toronto District School Board. The Education Act recognizes that on-reserve pupils attending off-reserve schools constitute a distinct demographic within the school board's broader pupil population that would not otherwise be represented in the school board, elected from within the board's jurisdiction. For that reason, the Education Act entitles a First Nation band council to appoint an Indigenous trustee. What the Education Act fails to acknowledge is the reality of off-reserve First Nation pupils who live in Toronto. And it fails to acknowledge that urban Indigenous peoples and urban Indigenous communities are a distinct demographic with unique educational and cultural needs.
I just, before this goes further, can you clarify that Indigenous people on reserves have the right to vote in elections?
Yes, that is correct, through the chair.
So in their regions where they live, they would be allowed to vote for the trustee that's running for elections.
Correct, that is correct, through the chair.
Thank you. Trustee Pay, do you have further questions?
Yeah, sorry, Madam Chair. I'm a little confused here. So unreserved families, they could vote as well for trustee?
Thank you, and through the chair, as confirmed, the Toronto District School Board has a specific jurisdiction. Individuals vote for trustees within their ward. On reserve communities who do not have a trustee do not vote for trustees within the jurisdiction of the Toronto District School Board.
So basically, in other words, they could not vote.
Through you, Madam Chair. Trustee Pei, I did not hear or understand your last question. Could you please repeat?
Because I want to understand the rights of reserve families and unreserved families. What are voting rights? Who can vote, who cannot vote?
Through you, Madam Chair. So Trustee Pei, to clarify your question, perhaps I can try to paraphrase in two parts. Are you asking, one, if families that live on reserve have the opportunity to vote for school board trustee in their area, as well as have the band having an opportunity to appoint an Indigenous trustee? So that would be one question for clarification. And the second part is, are you asking about the arrangements in an urban Indigenous area like Toronto, what the voting opportunities are? Can you confirm that those are the two parts of the question that you'd like answered?
Yeah, so Mr. Director, I just want to point out, on the agenda, page 7, if you look at the bottom, page 7, agenda page 7. The bottom.
Sorry,
Regarding the under section 188 of the act.
Is that the document that's in private?
Yes,
okay.
Madam Chair.
So you can't, sorry, trustee Pei, that the document in private session is a confidential legal document. It's not to leave the private session.
Okay, so what I would really want is clarify here is that as I understand, from this legal opinion, and family of children living
Madam
unreserved.
Chair, through you,
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I apologize, Trustee Pei, for interrupting. Can I just clarify if you are referring to the document from private session, which is off limits in this public conversation, or if you're referring to a different document?
Yeah, through Madam Chair, Mr. Director, you're correct. So I'm not going to call that documentation. I'm just going to rephrase my questions. Okay, hope you can understand. And if I understand this correctly, family of children living on reserve couldn't vote for a trustee in a school district where they didn't live, so there was no other way for them to be represented. Today, don't the children currently living off the reserve in TDF district have the right to vote for a trustee?
Thank you.
May I
And through
ask
the
the first
chair.
question?
Thank you. And through the chair, yes. Off reserve individuals, communities certainly have the right in Toronto to vote for a trustee.
So, I mean, that means like off reserve students are being discriminated against compared to unreserved student that they could not, vote for trustee.
Thank you. And through the chair, I've answered that question.
So if off, so what's the answer is that? Through Madam Chair.
Through you, Madam Chair, Trustee Pei, Council has just advised that the question you're asking has been answered, and I would confirm that it's been answered on more than one occasion.
Okay, So my next question is, if all reserve students are represented by indigenous trustee and could vote for trustee at the election time as well, this would give them representation rights greater than all other TDS families. And would that result in differential treatment from unreserved families? The next question would be, how do we reconcile this and the allegation of discrimination?
Thank you. And through the chair, the motion that is currently before this committee does not result in any discrimination. It is constitutional. It is in line with this board's obligations under the Education Act.
Okay,
Trustee May?
so, okay, my next question would be, would that appropriate for the board appoint non-member of the board to a committee to make a recommendation to the board for a trustees appointment?
Through the chair, apologies, Trustee Pei, could you repeat that question?
My question is that, do we really following the Education Act that appoint non-member of the board to form committee and then make a recommendation to the committee?
Thank you. And through the chair, again, the wording on the motion with respect to the establishment of a standing committee is in line with this board's obligations under the Education Act.
Okay, I finished questions. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Earhart?
Oh, I'd waived. Thanks very much.
So first we have to vote on the amendment. The original recommendation in the report was that the report be received. So the amendment is on screen. So could we please open the vote on the amendment?
Sean in favor.
Striska Marker in favor.
Trustee Pei, Trustee Patel, Trustee Nunziata.
Patel in favor.
Thank you. Trustee Gose.
Trustee Gose in favor.
Thank you. Trustee Nunziata. Trustee Pei.
Trustee Pei against.
Trustee Nunziata.
Trustee Nunziata in favor.
Thank you. Okay, and that carries. So the amendment is approved to go forward. And now we vote on the amendment. We vote on the whole thing. Now we're voting on the entire motion and report.
Sean in favor.
Trustee Nunziata in favor.
Pei against.
Striska Marker in favor. Trustee Gose in favor.
Laskin in favor.
Arts in favor.
Patel in favor.
Okay, that carries. Thank you very much. So our next items on the agenda are under number 8 for information only, and this is 8.1 procedure 515, human rights and code-based workplace harassment procedure, and 8.2 is procedure 531, selection and review of learning resources revised procedure. Do staff have any comments or information that they want to provide.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, over to Human Rights Officer Executive, Ibrahim to comment. I apologize.
Thank you. Good evening, trustees, and through you, Chair. The TDSB remains committed to upholding and fulfilling its obligations for human rights, and also in accordance with the multi-year strategic plan, continues to look at ways in which we advance human rights. And human rights for all, including Indigenous people, we take a three-pronged approach to this work, which is to foster a climate of understanding and mutual respect. We are going to focus more going forward towards early resolution and early intervention. And also, we also have the complaints mechanisms that we will continue to use and provide a remediation through. Our main focus is to restore and bring people back quickly so that the impacts on our students in terms of their access to education and their well-being are minimized, and also the impacts on staff well-being, morale, and their access to employment are minimized. With all of that in mind, we looked at improving efficiencies in our process with clear goals to build capacity with mechanisms like alternate dispute resolution. So we have before you an amended or revised procedures 515 that give us the ability to expeditiously address concerns of human rights nature or workplace harassment that is code-based or tied to a human rights ground. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Trustee Laskin, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair, to staff. Can you give us a sense of timelines? Because in the past, I understand that you are seeking to expedite with different procedures built in. Can you give us a sense, hypothetically, somebody makes a complaint, is there an expectation that within 6 weeks, within 3 months, is there a general timeline that's expected? Through you, Madam Chair, to staff.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Trustee Laskin, thank you for the question. The timelines at this time remain the same, which is processing from start to finish about 90 days for an investigation on the outer side. This is because we are shifting gears to do more work on the front end of the process to build capacity, to uphold human rights, to intervene early, to do more ADR. So we are doing less of the lengthier process that takes us out. And we will be in a better position to adjust those timelines as we build capacity on the front end. And that's sort of the focus of that. So we will be able to shift it going forward in the next iteration. But at this iteration, we've kept it the same. The other thing is that we have many external factors that affect our timelines. For example, staff being away. For example, 2 months of the year, we don't have access to certain staff. We don't have access when they're away on leaves and so on. But what we're going to do going forward is better track the actual time. So if we minus away leaves that are in no one's control, just happens that someone is sick or they're having a baby or whatever good reason that they're away, we can start to look at better those timelines. And one of the things we've made progress with is better communication through you, Chair, to Trustee Laskin, better communication around where they are and their ability to have a point person to ask, where is my case right now? How far have you proceeded? What happens next? And also, if a matter is delayed due to leaves or such, that communication is flowing better. And the reason I'm using the word better so much is because that's what we're hearing back from unions and associations, that they are happy with those improvements, which have been gradual, but we want to pick up the pace with those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And my other question is, in terms of support person for complaints, respondents, and witnesses, is the list exhaustive? Or can a support person include a trustee?
through you, Madam Chair, to Trustee Laskin. I've never had that question asked. I will go away and think some more about it, but typically it has never been somebody, I'll start off with the conflict of interest and perception, right? While people can be fair, but the perception of someone that high authority being part of an investigation process might skew the balance a little in terms of power differential. So those are some of the things that we would consider. Typically, though, if it's a family member and so on, we do look at context in terms of who's best able to support the person through that process. But that is definitely a new question, but it might, I suspect, raise issues of perceived bias in terms of the power differential in that equation. But
I
we've not had
simply
requests.
ask because sometimes staff may contact you and feel that you can empathize with their position. And so I was just curious about that. I just ask out of curiosity. Those were my questions on that one, Madam Chair. I have questions on the next one when appropriate.
Okay, we have Trustee Shan.
Sorry, that was from before.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you very much. So I don't see any other ones. Was there comments on 8.2? Sorry. Were there any staff comments regarding?
System Superintendent, Diana, I can speak to the next item unless Audley wants to start.
So through the chair, I'll start. I'm going to just start with the notion that this particular item is coming forward with respect to the learning resources that we use and establishing new criteria with which we are doing an assessment. I'm going to turn it over to Centrally Assigned Principals Suzanne Jouid if she's on in order to speak to this. Suzanne?
Good afternoon, through the chair. PR 531 outlines the requirements and the process for selecting and reviewing learning resources. It establishes a framework for responding to inquiries and concerns about learning resources. It's a tiered approach, including request for reconsideration. Major changes: merge PR 531 and 532. The consideration for the context of use for specific learning experiences, textbook selection, classroom collections, and library collection. It has an additional section about the selection of digital resources and tools, the process of learning, the donation of learning materials, and more clarity and emphasis on stages and roles for conversation with requester. We have developed a guide for administrators to support with the process, and we developed a school library collections that are attached to support community engagement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much. I have had experience with asking for clarification on some library materials. And I am wondering if there's anything in this procedure that has been revised that would prohibit, I'm not talking about censoring materials, but hypothetically, there's a book where there are outlines of countries and it is not factually correct in terms of the current geography and states. And in the past, I have been quite disappointed that that book has remained. And I am wondering what the obligation is of the school board to ensure its materials are actually factually correct that they have in their libraries. Through you, Madam Chair, to staff.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to turn it to Ms. Jouid to respond.
Thank you. Through you, the chair. We follow a process when the request is at a local level. There are terms and conditions outlined in the process, and there were more considerations and more questions and reflections and more departments to be involved in the central team as well as in the local team. That's why we created the guide for the principal when the concern is local. When the concern is central, we also added more terms and conditions to support with the process. And there is a differentiation at times between fiction and nonfiction in terms of other pieces when it comes to concerns regarding non-fictional material. Thank you.
Thank you through you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure that has answered my question. Would it be acceptable that there's a book in our school library that includes maps that disregard current geography?
So through the chair, part of what we'd endeavor to do is ensure as best as we can a level of accuracy that is when it comes to learning resources. That being said, learning resources would need to go through the review process that's outlined in this particular procedure based on a case-by-case basis. And that's where Mr. Jouid has made reference to conversations and consultations with a broader group of individuals in order to come together in order to look at materials. Thank you.
I'm sorry, through you, Madam Chair. I'll just try one more time. Is it appropriate that a public school board has an atlas in its library that has countries in it that are not geographically, factually correct?
Through the chair, we'd want material that is accurate in those libraries as best as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no further questions on the procedures, then I need a motion to adjourn. Trustee Laskin, seconder.
Trustee Patel.
Thank
Trustee
you very
Ghost.
much. Trustee Patel beat you to it. I'm just going to say, anybody opposed? And hearing none. Thank you very much, everyone. Safe travels home.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah, it'll do.